Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast, brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. I'm Jack Flintham and I'm joined today by Steven Railston. Steve, how are we?
Very well, thank you, Jack. As I was just saying, I was at the cinemas last night. Went to go see the new Bruce Springsteen film. Big Springsteen fan. I was probably the youngest in the cinemas by quite a stretch. I think I had some funny looks. But I really enjoyed myself. I had a good day yesterday. I had a better day than Prince Andrew, formerly known
going political on the pod. I wasn't expecting that.
Well, I'm not sure that's political, but yeah, it's good day. How's yourself?
Yes, yeah, not too bad. Obviously, we've got Halloween to come today, so I'm looking forward to load of trick-or-treaters knocking round, got pumpkins out and everything, so that'll be fun. Nice way to spend my evening before the match tomorrow. And speaking of, we're in the sort of fortunate position this week that Amorim has spoken before we have a chance to chat. During that, one of the main takeaways was probably about Lisandro Martinez and him being back in full training. That's a big boost for United, isn't it?
Yeah, so it'd been coming. He's kind of been stepping up his recovery from an knee injury in the last few weeks, and the club have been kind of carefully bringing him along, being very careful about his recovery and really wanting to get it right to time his return to full training properly. And he returned to full training on Wednesday. So it was communicated to us yesterday. We're recording this on a Friday. So the club had confirmed to us just before the press conference that Martinez was back in full training. But Ruben Amorim confirmed during his presser that Martinez would not be available for Nottingham Forest this weekend, which wasn't a surprise at all. I'd reported earlier in the month that Tottenham was probably seen as a realistic return date for himself, potentially to target. Obviously, when he gets back into full training, he needs to see how his body reacts. Everything needs to go smoothly. He's been off the pitch for a long time. Obviously sustained a very serious knee injury, the dreaded ACL at the beginning of February. So it's been 8 months. That was against Crystal Palace when he went down, and he looked to be in a world of pain when he went down that day at Old Trafford. He looked visibly distraught. He was brought off on a stretcher, and it's been a long road to recovery. And unfortunately, Martinez has had a few injuries now during his time at the club. He's 27 years old. He's had a few knee problems. It's a real test of you as a person and your resilience when you've gone through these layoffs, because again, it's time away from the pitch. It's time away from doing his job and what he loves. And he's just working in the gym on his own and with a physiotherapist. But as I said, there's been some positive signs in the last few weeks. It was clear that he was close to a return, and it's fantastic to see him back in full training. It's obviously a boost, but as I say, I will caveat that with it could be another week and a half, or perhaps it might even be after the international break. It might even be after Tottenham that he comes back into the squad, because United will not rush him. He's obviously, as I said, been off the pitch for 8 months, so there's no incentive really to kind of rush him back, because they're playing very well. Even if they were playing badly, they wouldn't rush him, but they've got to do the right thing by the player, and that means steadily bringing him along. So obviously great to see him back, but it could be potentially another fortnight. Hopefully he is back in the squad for Tottenham, but a boost nonetheless to see him back on the pitch with the full group on Wednesday.
Definitely. And it's interesting really with Martinez. When he was injured, it felt, when he was first injured back in February, felt a really big blow to United. Obviously, as you've mentioned there, United are slowly improving in their form, and obviously we're on the back of 3 straight wins. Do you see, when he's back to full fitness, and obviously it'd be very unlikely if he does get back into the Tottenham squad that he'll start at Tottenham, but once he's back to full fitness, do you see him getting back into that team, into the back 3?
Yeah, as you've said, he'd be slowly bedded in and gradually brought along. And when he is fit enough to be in the matchday squad again, it might be a few substitute appearances, getting minutes off the bench, getting back up to speed. Because although you can get fitness in training, match fitness is obviously very different. But in terms of when he is actually back up to speed, as you've said, will he get back into that team? It's a really interesting conversation, because Luke Shaw has started every Premier League game this season on the left side of the back three. And if you ignore the Manchester City game, he's actually had a very good campaign. There was a lot made about Shaw's performance against City. And as I said, probably rightly so. He was very disappointing, but again, the team were collectively bad. But Shaw probably stood out, and he got a lot of criticism. He took a lot of flack after that game. But that game aside, he's actually been very good. So Martinez will struggle to win his starting role back, because Shaw's playing so well. And it's almost a joke now with Shaw that in a World Cup year or in a Euro year, he just plays so well. There is obviously other factors to do with that. United aren't in Europe. They exited the Carabao Cup in the second round against Grimsby. There are fewer fixtures, and that means there is not a demanding workload on Luke Shaw's body. And when Luke Shaw's playing one game a week, he is a really, really good defender. We've seen that this season. He just unfortunately can't play 2 games a week, 3 games a week. And if you look back last year, when we discussed that kind of run of form when United had last won 3 games on the bounce around February 2024. Luke Shaw had picked up an injury around that period, and before Christmas as well. And there was a few little muscle injuries that had kind of crept back in. And I actually went back and I broke it down, and he was playing a game every 2.5 days immediately after coming back from muscle injury. And you don't need to be a sports scientist or a physiotherapist to work out that wasn't very sensible. When a player comes back from muscle injury, you should be being very careful, as United are with Martinez, which is obviously a more serious injury, but muscle injuries in particular, you need to be very careful. And Luke Shaw actually went to the Euros, and he got a lot of criticism because he was fit again. And it seemed like he was fit for England and not for United. And he kind of spoke out in an interview, I think with Simon Peach actually, at the time, and he spoke about how difficult it was for himself that season. And he admitted that Ten Hag himself and the medical staff probably would say a few months after the season had ended that they didn't handle it in the best manner, and he should have been given more time. So it was interesting to read those quotes. You rarely hear a player kind of come out and say that. So look, Shaw's going to stay fit now, hopefully, touch wood, because as I said, there's fewer games, and that will make it more difficult for Martinez to get back into the side. And also, look, Martinez is a huge personality. He's great in the dressing room, and Ruben Amorim has mentioned that a few times now when discussing his comeback and his recovery, and clearly brings a lot to training, and he gives that kind of spirit and that edge. But I think there has to be question marks really around his performances, in the sense that before he picked up his knee injury, he scored goals against Liverpool at Anfield. He scored the match winner against Fulham at Craven Cottage. Okay, that was heavily deflected, but it was still the match winner nonetheless. And he was in a kind of a decent run of form, but I still didn't think he was at the level that he was in his first season at the club. He was fantastic that season. Obviously picked up a metatarsal injury at the end of the campaign, but for the first 7 months or so, he made such a huge impression after signing from Ajax. His ability to break through the lines with his passing makes him such a unique option. His left foot made him the first choice for Erik ten Hag, because he loved having a left-footed defender in the team who could get those passing angles off. So it's interesting. I don't think he is that player now. I don't think he's the same player. That's not to say that he can't get back to that level, because of course he potentially could, and hopefully he does when he returns from injury. But whether or not we've seen that Martinez since, I'm not so sure. And a lot of that is to do with injuries. It makes it incredibly difficult to reach your maximum level when you've had so many knee injuries. And he's had some bad luck, unfortunately, since he's joined the club.
Definitely. And I think it's one of those as well. United aren't helped either by their lack of European football. They're out of the Carabao Cup, obviously. It'll be January the next time they're playing a game that's not in the Premier League. It doesn't help not having a load of first team opportunities for Martinez to be back in, does it?
Yeah, and it's the same with a lot of players now. They're all in a similar position that aren't playing. For example, Joshua Zirkzee and Kobbie Mainoo, and obviously I can't say what Ruben Amorim said, but he asked about those players again in the embargo section of the press conference. So those quotes will go out tonight at 10:30. It's a balancing act for Amorim this season, because he's got there's fewer games to work with. usually United would be fighting on all fronts, playing in different competitions, and that means you can give opportunities to younger players, to players on the fringe of the squad. But that's not the case this season. He's have to really balance things. So yeah, it is different.
Yeah, and speaking of Ruben Amorim, he's been speaking to Sky this week ahead of the game. It's now coming up to a year since he was appointed. It was interesting. He mentioned about everything changing in a month. I was just wondering about your perspective on that one, because it does feel like there's been a real shift around United, doesn't it? Just because of wins.
Well, he's right, isn't he? I mean, after Brentford, when they lost 3-1 down at the G-Tech, the conversation had started again about Ruben Amorim's future, and the pressure was huge. He looked kind of like a manager on the edge on the touchline when that third goal went in. I remember recording the video and posting it online. His body language didn't look good. He was obviously very disappointed, understandably. And when he left the press conference, I noticed he had a little tap on the shoulder from a United staff member, as if to say, keep your head up. But he's enjoyed an October to remember. He's won the Premier League's Manager of the Month award. I mean, it's incredible how quickly things can turn around if you win a few games of football, 3 games on the bounce, and his whole demeanour seems to have changed. He seems so much more beaten and happy, and it looks like a weight's been lifted off his shoulders. I don't think we can possibly imagine the stress and the expectation that you have to deal with as a Premier League manager. It's obviously they're very handsomely paid for their struggles, but it's a crazy job in that aspect, in aspects of that. So yeah, when he sat down with Sky, it was interesting to hear his quotes, because he'd spoken about Sir Jim Ratcliffe's backing and admitted that had helped them. I think Amorim probably had to say that. I don't think there's anything he could probably say. It's probably the sensible thing to say. And at the time, when I read the quotes from Sir Jim Ratcliffe to the Times, which if anyone hasn't seen them by now, he obviously said he would like Amorim to be in charge for 3 years, and he'd give him kind of his public backing. I thought Ratcliffe probably couldn't have said anything else really either. He's not going to come out and say, look, we're having doubts about Ruben. He's going to be on the chopping block if he doesn't win the next game. He came out and backed him, and that's what I know and I should do. But that wouldn't have necessarily given cast iron guarantees of staying at the club. We only need to look at last season when Omar Barada and Dan Ashworth spoke to journalists in the Old Trafford boardroom before the Liverpool game at the beginning of last September in 2024. And they were asked about Erik ten Hag's future, and they backed him in no uncertain terms to succeed, said he was their man. I think it was 57 days later he was sacked. So, of course, as members of the club in the boardroom, you're going to back your manager in public, but what you're thinking behind the scenes might be slightly different. And Ratcliffe did come out and back Amorim, which he clearly did appreciate, because he has said that in press conferences as well, that he appreciated the Ratcliffe coming out and showing support. But yeah, what Ratcliffe was privately thinking at that time is probably another matter, because let's face it, he needed to win games, and Amorim admitted that himself. He said, look, although I remember at the time when he was asked about the quotes, he said, I appreciate the backing, but I'm realistic. I know I need to win football matches. And look, he's won 3 on the bounce. So it's actually a really good interview. It's by Juliet Ferrington in Sky and the sofa up in the second floor of Carrington. So it's worth listening to if you're a United fan. And I think it's only 10 minutes long or so. But Amorim does a lot of obviously media stuff because he's contractually obliged with the rights holders and stuff. So I think fans can sometimes be confused why so much stuff's going out, but it's in the contract with Sky and stuff. So he has to do it. That's why.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of those things. It's funny you should mention that he mentioned it. I think it might have been November or December time, potentially to Gary Neville, about how shocked he was at how much media he had to do as United boss. And I think if you look now at how Amorim is with the media to how he was potentially at the beginning of his stint, he seems a lot more relaxed in that sort of atmosphere, and and I think also that helps due to the wins this month as well, doesn't it?
I didn't actually notice at the time at the start of the press conference yesterday, because he came in, he said good afternoon, and we obviously all said good afternoon back, and he tapped Jamie Jackson's shoulder as he walked in, and Jamie sits on the front row, and he'll ask some good questions, and obviously Amorim appreciates it, and he gave him a few taps as he walked in. So it showed Amorim was in good form straight off the bat at yesterday's press conference. And again, as usual, he came across very well. His press conferences have always been great. He's always been tremendous value. He seems really upbeat. And even in kind of photos that fans have been uploading outside the training ground. I think people have been quote unquote looking at his, suggesting that his aura has changed. I hate that word, but there's a glow around Amorim at the moment, and that's understandable because when you're losing matches and you're under such pressure, of course it's going to take a toll on yourself. But when you're winning games, it makes such a difference. And the same goes with the players. It breeds confidence. There's a lot of positivity. Look at these podcasts in the last fortnight, last 2 weeks and a half. They've been very positive. It's hugely refreshing, and of course it helps everyone at the club. There's just a real feel-good factor at the moment. But they need to keep on winning games. Of course they do. In Nottingham Forest is a big chance to do that again on Saturday. It's a really big game. All the games are big, especially with no Europe. But they've just got to keep winning football matches, yeah.
Definitely. And I think it's been interesting that the at Old Trafford, fans haven't really turned on Amorim. And I think it might be potentially to do with how he is after matches as well. You mentioned, I think after Brighton, he was out and there were people waiting for him to introduce himself. I remember walking back to my car, people were shouting for Amorim's name and what have you and he came over and he greeted them. He has that sort of really good spirit with the fan base, doesn't he?
I think was it the Sunderland game where I'd noticed the Ruben Amorim banner before Burnley, and that said, "Well, you'll turn the Reds around," and his name was sung on during that game, and then I'm not sure that was present before the Sunderland game. That's not to say the flag wasn't there, and you can't read much into a flag. You can't gauge the whole supporters' sentiment or feeling of a bloody banner in the Stretford end. But it's interesting. Yeah, I think the match-going fans are very loyal. They rarely or never turn on a manager. He's still retaining strong support on match days. And you're right. I mean, who he is as a person and his personality is very admirable. Even in the darker times last season, there wasn't many good results at all. But regardless of the result, win, lose, or draw, and there were a lot of defeats, there were a lot of draws at Old Trafford, he still took time after games to speak to fans, to take photos, to sign autographs. As a human, as a person, he's clearly a brilliant person. Not all Premier League managers do that. You would not blame them for making an early exit, especially after bad defeats. Got enough on their plate. They need to be spending 45 minutes with fans outside Old Trafford, sometimes in the cold, sometimes in the rain, signing autographs. Of course, they don't need to do that, but Ruben Amorim does, and it's, as I said, it's really admirable for him to do that. And I think I left. I can't remember what time it was specifically when I left the Brighton game, but I'd taken a video of him taking a selfie with a young fan who was absolutely made up and delighted. I'm actually going to speak to them for an article today and get that out. But then I think another mention to Peachy, I think he had uploaded a similar video later on. And if you look at the timestamps between those two videos, I think there was around 40 minutes. So he made his way around the start of the fans and spent at least 40 minutes speaking to every single one of them, signing their autographs, taking photos. And again, it's hugely admirable. Even at Grimsby, when a shocking result, a new low, it was terrible. And after the game, he kind of done his small little press conference on the pitch. Only 3 of us were allowed down because there wasn't facilities to have a press conference. And some young Grimsby fans had asked him for a photo as he walked back into the changing room. And usually, I mean, you just ignore them, wouldn't you? I think you would not blame Ruben Amorim, especially after that result, to just keep his head down and ignore the kids. But he took a second just to take a photo. And I think that's why everyone's rooted for him and wanted him to do well, because he's a really good person. We could do without another managerial sacking. And he's really good value in press conferences. So, look, that's all well and good, but he needed results on the pitch because, of course, they dictate the narrative. But he's won 3 in the bounce, and the outlook's looking better now. Definitely.
And we're going to take a short break there, and after the break we'll be discussing that next game to see if he can make it 4 in a row against Nottingham Forest. Right, welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. And next up, obviously, for United is Nottingham Forest away tomorrow. A very strange season so far for Forest. Obviously, they started the season with Nuno. He's left. Ange came in. He's left. It's now Sean Dyche at the club. What can we expect from them tomorrow?
They're a bit of a basket case, aren't they? I mean, it's Marinakis, isn't he? I always thought when he came in, it was always going to end in tears. Fair play. They win Europe last season, Europa League, controversially, perhaps should have been the conference. Obviously, had the legal dispute with Crystal Palace. He's a fiery owner. He's a big personality, but when he came onto the pitch to confront Nuno, you could tell it was all going to end in tears, and Nuno had done a fantastic job. Shouldn't have sacked him, and they're kind of reaping what they sowed, really. Postecoglou was a disaster. Did not look like the right fit, and he was a disaster. And now, understandably, they've gone for a safe pair of hands, Premier League proven, someone who can kind of steer the ship into safety, because they're really struggling this season, Nottingham Forest. But Dyche has got a really strong record of obviously keeping teams in the league. He'll tighten it up at the back, as I said the other day, inevitably, eventually. But that might take a little bit of time, and it might be a good time for United to play Nottingham Forest. But this is their first game, their first big game, I'd say, since Dyche has been appointed. So the atmosphere should be pretty decent at the City Ground. They've won the last 3 league games against United. They've actually had a very good record in the last 18 months, last year and a half. I was there at the City Ground in April when they won 1-0. Anthony Elanga obviously opened the scoring within 5 minutes using his kind of electric pace. It was a really impressive breakaway. Forest probably could have won that game by a little bit more. But around that time of the year, obviously United's focus was on the Europa League. You look back at those results, there was some funny games. There were essentially dead rubbers, and it was weird because it didn't really matter whether United won or not in the league at that point, because the league campaign had already been written off. And I think the only incentive to kind of win was obviously to, one, build confidence and some personal pride, but maybe get a few extra million by moving up a few places in the Premier League. But they make enough money to not give that too much consideration. But obviously they need to win games in league, but the Europa League was the focus. So it'll be interesting to see how they get on. And this Saturday, obviously, I think it's the first game this season where we truly expect them to win. The Burnley game, there was question marks at home, but now they're flying in the league. The 3 games on the bounce, 6 up in the table. So there's real confidence now, and there's real belief. And as I say, Forest have struggled. So all the indicators point to United doing very well. But they've got to, as I've said, keep the momentum, keep performing, and keep getting wins. And these are the kind of games, just like the Brighton game was, that you've got to win to move up the table. Far too often in the last few years have we seen setbacks against teams like this. We might see a few wins and then setbacks against the lower sides. But you've got to kind of put these sides to the sword and really build momentum and confidence.
Definitely. And you mentioned there about the atmosphere at the City Ground tomorrow. It's likely to be quite upbeat and positive. And obviously, yes, they lost to Bournemouth last time out, but they won the first game in charge under Dyche against Porto in the Europa League. How important is it for that sort of fast start? We saw it at Liverpool, just to dampen the home crowd, because especially, I mean, with Liverpool, yes, they were up near the top, but obviously they'd had defeats before that. The goal goes in and suddenly it gets a bit nervy at Anfield. You'd imagine the same scenario again. If United can start well, get an early goal, open in 20 minutes, kind of changes the sort of narrative of the afternoon, doesn't it?
I mean, you probably fancy them to go on to win 3 or 4-0 if they get an early goal on Saturday, just because of Forest's form. Dyche's whole game plan will be about keeping United out early. Ruben Amorim discussed kind of Dyche's approach and what to expect. And it was interesting because he'd mentioned the Everton game when he first came into the club. So last November, United played Everton. I believe it was 4-2. It was when Rashford scored the brace. And he described United as lucky that day in this press conference yesterday. And I actually said that. I remember recording the podcast after that game. I felt that at the time, because although it was comfortable for United in the end, if Everton had taken their chances, it would have been a completely different game. There was a moment, I think, for the first 20 minutes when there was chances at both ends, and Everton could have definitely scored. United have got a very good attack now. I mentioned that in the last 2 podcasts. All of a sudden now you look at their attack and think that is a very, very strong attacking 3. And there's a really interesting stat I just seen on the BBC's website there. From match day 3 onwards, only Arsenal have picked up more points than United. and no other team has scored more goals than United during that period. So United have scored 14 goals in that period. They've been the top goal scorers in the league with 14 since match day 3 onwards. That's really impressive. And obviously, as I said, they've spent a lot of money to overhaul the attack, and they did it in one transfer window. They recognised it was a problem. Went for Premier League proven players with Mbeumo and Kuna, which has worked. And Benjamin Sesko has gradually found his feet. And all of a sudden, you look at that attack and you fancy them to score. You fancy them to create and just cause trouble. So if United can do that on Saturday, which I expect them to do, I expect them to have no problem doing that. Look, as I've said, Dyche will tighten it up. Forest will be a bit more difficult to break down. But they're in a rut, they're in a bad place. And United are coming into this game with huge confidence. So as I say, it's different in the sense that we're actually looking at the game and expecting United to win. And I'm not actually sure that we've expected them to win this season. So it's slightly different in that sense.
Yeah, and it was interesting as well in the press conference. I think both managers have referred to it. Dyche made some comments on a podcast, I think, whilst unemployed, where he suggested that he could probably pick up more points, couldn't he, than Amorim. It's probably credit to Amorim that he's kind of brushed that off in the press conference and made it a bit of a non-factor, didn't he?
Well, everyone talks crap on podcasts, don't they? as we'll know. I thought Ruben Amorim handled that question really well, if I'm honest, because he was asked about Sean Dyche's criticism, and Dyche had made this comment in August where United was struggling. And he'd said, look, I could get better results with this team if I played 4-4-2. And Amorim kind of just smiled. He was very relaxed yesterday. As I said, a very good demeanour about him. So he was very upbeat and happy and on good terms with himself at the moment. And he said, well, I understand it. If you're a pundit, then you've got to say stuff that kind of generates headlines and grabs people's attention. And he said, well, if he didn't, then I don't want to watch a pundit like that. So I think he handled that question very well. And it's a sensible answer. I mean, as I said, Dyche was out of work at the time. He was sacked from Everton in January. So he'd been out of work for what, 8 months when he made that comment. It's probably 10 months now, 9 months. He's now back in management. And as I said, we all know what he's about. He'll tighten it up. He might play 4-4-2, but a traditional formation there. And Amorim discussed his setup again in the embargoed section and standing by it. But all of a sudden, as I've said, the conversation about the formation in Ruben Amorim's system is quieting down now. United have won a few games. Yeah.
And when it comes to the team selection tomorrow, how do you think we can see United lining up? I mean, it's very easy after another win just to go with the same team, isn't it? But obviously you've got Mason Mount back. He's ready to go. Do you see him potentially coming back into the side, or do you think it's going to be same again?
Yeah, I think same team. I think you just reward those players who performed against Brighton at the weekend. Obviously, Mason Mount came back into the squad after recovering from a knock. There is an injury doubt again around Harry Maguire, who picked up a knock in training around the same time as Mount. Maguire was absent last weekend. He could be back tomorrow, but we'll have to see. I think there'll be a late decision made on Maguire. And even if he is back in the squad, I couldn't imagine him starting on straight away on the back of that knock. I think they just name him on the bench and perhaps bring him on later in the game. He was actually a huge goal threat at the City Ground in April. When he came on, he almost scored. But look, we're not in the position these days where we need to throw Harry Maguire up front. There's options there. There's quality. So yeah, I think the same team. And again, kind of put something out on Casemiro for this morning, and his importance has been discussed really in the last week and highlighted again. He will start alongside Fernandes because he's so important to this team. And I think if you look back at his improvement, obviously, it can be traced back to Ruud van Nistelrooy's interim tenure because he struggled under Erik ten Hag. It was last September when he was brought off at half-time, September 2024, against Liverpool and replaced by Toby Collier. And Ruben Amorim had said after the last game against Brighton during his press conference, he talked about Casemiro's improvement, and he said he was even behind Collier in the pecking order. Toby Collier is now at West Brom on loan. And now Casemiro is incredibly important again for United. But I think we actually forget he struggled under Amorim initially. Obviously, you can trace it back to Van Nistelrooy, who put an arm around him, give him some confidence again. But he wasn't playing for Ruben Amorim to begin with. And I think by the end of January this year, I think he'd started in 4 games out of a possible 19, or I think it was that from Amorim's games in charge. So Amorim didn't fancy Casemiro. And he said in his press conference that he didn't think he had the characteristics to start regularly at that point. But everything changed in the spring. And I think his performance against Lyon in the quarterfinals Europa League might have been the turning point. He delivered a midfield clinic. He was fantastic. Obviously, he was really good during that Europa League run. The pace of the kind of competition suited him a lot more and saw him get back to his best. But he's continued that into this season. So fair play to Casemiro. And again, he'll be one of the first names on the team sheet come Saturday afternoon.
Definitely. And it'll be interesting to see how United deal with maybe a more physically demanding team. I think United did quite well last Saturday, benefiting from Brighton deciding to play out from the back, the high press and winning the ball. And I think we saw that potentially for Casemiro's goal. I think it was won back by Shaw. I might be getting that mixed up with Cunha's. But it'll be interesting. It'll be a different sort of challenge, won't it, from Forest? And maybe that's where Šeško does benefit from starting, with it being basically a more physically demanding game.
Well, we've talked a lot about this new approach from United in the last few weeks, and although Amorim hasn't changed his formation, he's changed a lot of things within that setup. So the defenders are more aggressive. They are pushing up higher and squeezing the opposition, squeezing the space a lot more, which helps win the ball back. United are winning more duels, they're winning more second balls, they're looking more physically imposing in that sense. And Senna Lomans has made a huge impact because he's sending the ball long, he's releasing pressure. United on dilly-dallying at the back, perhaps getting pressed and making a mistake and being dispossessed and giving the opposition an easy chance. They're sending it long. And there's been a conversation wider in the Premier League about that. I think there's been a lot of chatter in the last week and a half, actually, I've seen with Jamie Carragher talking about Liverpool and why they're struggling and Arsenal's kind of continued progress and how they've secured good results. And there's definitely been a clear shift in the Premier League to almost a regression, really, if you want to put it in those terms, back to kind of how football was in the 2000s, where it's heavily set piece orientated. Heavily second ball orientated. There's a lot of long balls. There's a lot of good long goal kicks, and I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. It's as I've said multiple times. There's no right way to play football, and there's always going to be ebbs and flows in football during different time periods of which way of playing is more fashionable. Pep Guardiola had a huge influence when he came into Manchester City in 2016, and basically everybody from championship managers to grassroots coaches, although they need to cop on because it's a bit embarrassing for a grassroots coach to try and make an under eight play out from the back. But I mean, it's ridiculous. Everyone was playing in that way because Guardiola played that way, and we've definitely seen a shift now. And even Guardiola is adapted himself. If you look at Manchester City's team, more often than not, their starting team are very physical. They've got tall players. They've got players who can run. It's become that kind of game again, the Premier League. And we've seen that from United during this very good run of form. We've seen that physicality about them. We've seen those long balls going forward. And again, I've used the word refreshing multiple times, but it is refreshing. It's enjoyable to watch, and it's underpinned those performances in the last few weeks.
Definitely. Well, it's going to be an interesting game tomorrow. As you've mentioned in the podcast today, Steve, there's the embargo press conference. Those quotes will be out at 10:30 p.m. this evening, so stay tuned for them. Obviously, tomorrow we're both going to be at the City Ground, bringing you all of the pre-match updates, analysis, all of that good stuff over the weekend. And then we'll be back on Monday to reflect on it all. So thanks for joining me, Steve, and we'll catch you again on Monday.